As I mentioned, my name is Melody, and I will be facilitating tonight's workshop with the support from my colleagues from BPS. To be respectful of everyone's time, we will wrap up on time by 9 p.m. And tonight's meeting is being recorded to serve as a resource for those who couldn't make it here today. So first, I would like to kindly ask everyone to rename themselves. If you speak English, please add the letter E in front of your name. If you speak Cantonese, please add a letter C in front of your name. And if you speak Mandarin, please add the letter M. Okay, thank you everyone. So without further ado, let's welcome Kathy and Julia, co-founders of Immigrant History Initiative.
Thank you so much, Melody. We are really happy to be here tonight with all of you. So I wanted to briefly introduce us. My name is Kathy. I will be co-presenting with my co-founder, Julia Wang. We are the co-founders of the Immigrant History Initiative. We work a lot on issues targeting the Asian American community, particularly around providing resources for the community and for educators on teaching about Asian American history and Asian American issues. So today, I wanted to give a brief content warning. We are going to be talking about things that are potentially troubling, instances of racial violence. And so I just wanted to flag that up front so that everybody is prepared for the discussions that we're going to have today. And as Melody noted, this meeting is going to be recorded. Okay. Before I get into the agenda, I wanted to take a brief moment to acknowledge the context in which we are having this workshop and meeting here together today. We are coming together during a really scary time. A lot of us might still be processing the graphic attacks that we've been seeing on the news against our elders, our families, women. These attacks have been going on since the start of the pandemic, although only recently have they begun to be picked up more and more by the mainstream news media who are finally paying attention. But I think a lot of us have probably already seen or experienced or heard about the violence since the start of the pandemic. Now, I have some numbers on this slide because I think it's always helpful to have these statistics to give a little bit more statistical weight to what our communities are experiencing. Obviously, during the COVID-19 pandemic, hate crimes against Asian Americans, especially those who appear East Asian, have been dramatically increasing. If we look at New York City alone, the Commission on Human Rights reported a 200-fold increase in racially motivated hate crimes against Asians. And this is 200-fold, not 200%, right? Literally 200 times the number of hate crime reports against Asians that they received in 2019, as opposed to 2020, when the pandemic started. If we look more broadly on a national scale, a national coalition of AAPI-oriented nonprofits, they collected data showing that over 3,800 reports of anti-Asian discrimination and violence across the country since 2020, when the pandemic broke out. And all of this has direct consequences for Asian American children. In a 2020 survey, 1 in 4 Asian American students reported experiencing racialized bullying during the pandemic. And what I mean by racialized bullying is bullying that is happening because they are targeting somebody because they are Asian. Bullying that is targeted based on racial background. Families can feel this, even if maybe they don't know the exact numbers of what's happening. In cities across the country, we have seen far smaller numbers of Asian parents choosing to send their children back to in-person learning compared to, for example, white parents. In some cities, less than half. And this is partly because many of them have serious safety concerns about what their students might experience in schools, about their children walking to school or walking to the bus stop and not having anybody to accompany them. All of this is why we are here today to talk about this, because we need to get these issues out into the open, and we need to have some strategies to begin combating and begin grappling with all of these really troubling things that we're seeing in our current day. Now, to give you a brief overview, we are going to give you some tools to not just have serious conversations about this with your children, but also how to equip your kids, how to give them tools on how to deal with racialized instances and still protect their mental health. We are also being joined by the Office of Equity for Boston Public Schools to walk through BPS's reporting protocols so that you know exactly what to do, what channels to go through in case something like this happens and you need to advocate on behalf of your child. Now, we're going to start off with history because the racism that we see today, it didn't come from nowhere. What we are seeing today has deep roots in American history. And knowing this historical context will help you better understand what's happening today. And it will also enable you to better explain to other people why certain things that are being said or done to us are so problematic and wrong. I also want to point out that we are going to have breakout rooms to have some smaller group discussions and activities around this, so you'll have an opportunity to speak with other parents. And at the very end, we're going to have a Q&A session so that you will have a chance to ask questions that come up or that you've been thinking about. And I'm going to hand it over to my co-founder, Julia Wong, to get us started on the history.
Thanks so much, Kathy. Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. So let's kind of start with a little bit of history. Asian Americans have actually been in the US, in this country, for a very long time. But for just as long as we have been here, Asian Americans have also faced discrimination, exclusion, and violence. So let's kind of go back to the beginning. The first big wave of Asian migration to the US actually took place in the mid to late 1800s, largely from East and South Asia. So for example, a large number of Chinese laborers, mostly from the southern coastal provinces of Canton and Fujian in China, were recruited to work on the Transcontinental Railroad. And actually, many of them died in the process because the work was so dangerous and hard. Japanese and Korean laborers were first brought to Hawaii to work on sugarcane and pineapple plantations, and many eventually settled on the West Coast. South Asian immigrants, mostly men from the Punjab and Bengali regions, came to the US and Canada in the late 1800s, mostly settling in the South and on the West Coast and coming here in search of work. And in the 20th century, many Filipino Americans came to the West Coast after the US occupied the Philippines, and the Philippines became a colony and a territory of this country. So even though Asian immigrants were heavily recruited to come to the US, their presence was not always welcome. And in fact, they were not welcome for much of this history. So during the late 1800s and the early 1900s, many laws were passed to prevent Asians from entering the US. First, they excluded the Chinese, and then other Asian groups until everyone from Asia was prohibited from coming into the country. So what you see on the screen now is a very, very broad timeline of the kinds of immigration laws that were passed to prevent Asians from coming into this country. So in 1882, you have the Chinese Exclusion Act, which was the first piece of immigration law that prohibited a single race from entering the US. And it finally ended in 1924 with the Immigration Act that basically prevented all Asians from coming into the US. In addition, Asian Americans and Asian immigrants for much of this time, this period, were treated as second class and inferior in a lot of the places that they lived. So what did this mean? This meant that Asian immigrants, for example, couldn't naturalize and become citizens. They couldn't live or work where they wanted to. And in many cases, they couldn't own land. And the Asian communities where they lived often faced a lot of violence in the form of mob violence or sometimes even race riots. However, Despite these difficulties, Asian Americans really persevered in history. From the start, Asians fought against the way that they were treated, right? Against the discriminatory laws that were passed. Asian Americans sued in the court for equal treatment. So on the slide, you see a series of examples of cases that Asian Americans brought to challenge the unfair way that they were treated. One really famous example is that of Wang Kim Ark, or Huang Jinde in Mandarin. He was a young man who challenged the Chinese Exclusion Act and actually won his case in the Supreme Court, which is the highest court in this country. The court found that even though Wang Kim Ark was Chinese, because he was born in the US, he had a right to be in this country and he had a right as an American citizen. So because of Wang Kim Ark and because of his fight, we have something called birthright citizenship in this country, which is the reason that everyone who's born in the US today is a citizen. So Asian Americans left a really important legacy in the history and the laws and the policies of this country. And this fight continued into the 20th century. During World War II, hundreds of thousands of Japanese Americans were actually imprisoned in camps, even at the same time as Asian Americans were fighting for the US during the war. And Japanese Americans fought really hard against their treatment, right, in these prison camps through the court and through civil disobedience. Now we fast forward a little bit into the later half of the 20th century. In the 1960s, the law changed to allow more immigration from people from Asia in response to increasing labor needs and sort of a new kind of era of immigration. And they recruited a lot of people, and a lot of people immigrated because they were working in the fields of the physical sciences, the medical field, the technology fields. And then in the 1970s, many Vietnamese, Cambodian, Laotian, and Hmong refugees came to the US following the Vietnam War. So during this time, you see a significant kind of immigration by Asians. And it was also during this time that Asians formed this identity that we call Asian American around not only their shared ethnic origins from the continent of Asia, but also around the similarities in their lived experiences in this history. And today, Asian Americans represent a very diverse and very large community, and one that is rapidly growing, and with people that are represented with heritage and roots in over 20 countries in East, Southeast, and South Asia. And Asian Americans actually represent the fastest growing group in the voting population in the US, which means that as a community, we have increasing potential for representation and for political power. So that kind of gives you a very, very quick and broad sense of Asian American history. And like Kathy said, why is history important? History provides really important context for understanding bias and understanding racism. And in this case, for understanding racism against those of us who identify as Asian. And so now we're going to shift gears a little bit and provide some background information on what anti-Asian bias might look like now, especially for kids.
Okay, so we've heard about this long history of Asian Americans, and I want to narrow down now to two major stereotypes about Asians that were formed during this history and really entrenched, really grew deep roots into American society. And these are, first, the perpetual foreigner stereotype, and second, the model minority myth. These two stereotypes still affect us today, and we talk about them because they can be helpful in terms of labeling certain racist interactions and explaining the harm that it has, even when an incident might not be directly physically violent. So the perpetual foreigner stereotype is the assumption that all Asian people have to come from outside of the United States or just be foreigners. For example, your child might get asked, "Where are you really from?" even after they say that maybe they were born in the United States. Or a classmate might tell your child to go back to China or some other country for the purpose of belittling them or making them feel small. During COVID, when non-Asians tell Asians that we are the reason that COVID is in the US, This comes from the racist assumption that the Asian person is, 1, not American, 2, from China, and 3, has somehow carried it over to Asia after getting the disease, over from Asia to the United States after getting the disease in China. So this perpetual foreigner stereotype has roots in the history of discrimination against Asians that Julia has talked about, this history of attempting time and time again to keep Asians outside of this country. And it continues to have dangerous consequences today, which we see on the news every day in the form of these anti-Asian attacks and other forms of violence. Now, I also want to spend a moment talking about the model minority myth, which is this idea that all Asians are successful, quiet, and obedient. And all of these words sound kind of positive, so sometimes people are confused about why we talk about this stereotype. And it's because even though it might feel like a positive stereotype, the way that it works is by making the unique traits or needs of the Asian community invisible. It is assumed that we don't need help, so resources and services aren't given to Asian American communities proportionally, the amount that they should be given depending on their population size. And in schools, you might see this like if an Asian student is struggling in math, but the teacher assumes that he's got to be good at math because he's Asian. And so they're not going to take time out of their day to specifically help this one Asian student because they think that the student shouldn't need help. Or maybe they think that the student will somehow get it, even if they're struggling now because they're Asian, and Asian students will always just get it. You might also see this as when an Asian child is bullied, the teacher might not recognize it as racist and try to sweep it under the rug because they think that maybe Asian communities don't face racism because we have achieved success, things like that. And this myth also works to keep Asian Americans from getting leadership positions because they're often dismissed as too quiet or too obedient. And finally, at the same time that this myth hurts Asian Americans, it also hurts other communities of color because they are held to this imaginary model minority standard and blamed if they can't live up to it. You might have experienced in the breakout rooms during the activity, racist incidents can have a significant effect on both your mind and your body. It can feel really frightening or out of your control. And we call this impact racial trauma, or the injury that is caused by encounters with racism, because these injuries do amount to trauma. And if racial trauma isn't properly addressed or addressed at all, it can have serious repercussions for your child's mental health. And so in order to help your child process this event in a healthy way, we are giving a few steps for how to approach these conversations with patience and with understanding and open-mindedness. And so I have here a 4-step process. So these steps are meant to be a guide, right? A starting point for you to begin to have these conversations, but they should evolve organically. And I'm just going to go through and give a quick summary of what we mean by each step. And afterwards, Julia is going to take us through a hypothetical scenario so you can see what this process might look like when you actually apply it to some facts. So step 1, emotional and physical regulation. This is actually what we did during the breakout room. This is about helping you and your child identify your physical and emotional reactions to what has happened, and then guiding them in calming down after the incident. It's about giving yourself and your child the time to process what happened, the time to calm down, the time to feel grounded in your body again, because these incidents can feel so out of control. And I also just want to emphasize, this time is for the parent too, because oftentimes when a parent is hearing about something that their child has heard about or seen or even experienced themselves, it can be really traumatizing for the parent. You can get really angry, you can get really sad, but you want to make sure that you have a period of emotional and physical regulation first before you move on to more substantive conversations with your child. And then step 2, investigation. This step should happen after you're both calm, your child is no longer upset or really worked up about what has happened. And you will know your child best. You will know when this is the right time to move on. Investigation is about talking with your child about what happened and how it made them feel. You should still do this even if you were there with the child, maybe if this incident happened in a grocery store or out in public. Because even though you were there, you don't necessarily know what was going through your child's head, how they were making sense of the situation. So it's good to use this step to touch base with your child. And you want to approach it in a really non-judgmental, curious, and collaborative way, even if what your child is saying doesn't quite line up with what you're thinking. You and your child are working together as detectives on this step to make sense of what happened. Step 3, problem solving. This step looks into the future. I think oftentimes people think, oh, I've gotten through the investigation step, we've talked about what happened, I can stop here. But we want this process to be an empowering one for your child. We don't want to end it at, okay, I've talked about what happened and it made me feel really terrible. We want to think about how you can approach similar incidents in the future, because it's about helping your child grapple with this and move forward, become a stronger person. And so support your child and help them think about options for maybe how they might want to react next time, or if they see something like this happening again. And then step 4, practice.
Sorry, Kathy, can you just slow down? We got something in the chat that said just slow down for the interpretation.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Yes, I can definitely slow down. Okay. Step 4, practice. In the moment of a racialized incident, your child and you probably, you're going to feel really stressed out, and your child's mind might go blank. Their body might go into fight, flight, or freeze mode. And it's going to be much easier for them to remember and do what you both brainstormed together about doing if you practice together beforehand in a safe space. And this can look like role playing, even if it feels a little bit silly, just so that your child gets kind of used to these movements and these actions so that they can implement it even when they are feeling really out of control or really scared. They still have these ingrained habits to fall back on. Okay, and I'm going to hand it over to Julia to think about how to apply these steps to an actual hypothetical situation.
Great, thank you, Kathy. Okay, so let's kind of use these steps and walk through a hypothetical scenario that happens to your child when she's at school. So your daughter, who is in middle school, comes home and she's really upset. And she tells you that someone made fun of her on the playground, let's say, made fun of her eyes and called her slanty eyes. So your daughter told the teacher, and the teacher said, well, this classmate, this boy probably didn't mean it. And he was probably just, teasing you. So your daughter is clearly really upset, but you're not really sure if, she understands exactly that this comment is racist or coming from bias, but you know that she's, really having a hard time. So let's go through the steps. So step 1, emotional physical regulation. So the first thing you can do if your child is, really upset, she's coming home, telling you that, this happened, she's really, maybe crying or maybe really angry, you can first do something like the breakout room exercise that you did, to kind of have her locate where she is feeling the stress or the trauma in her body, Ask her to express how she's feeling, is it anger, is it sadness? And then communicate with her about sort of how intense her emotion is, are you at a 1, are you at a 10, 15? But the most important thing here is to validate, right, the stress and tension that she's feeling. You can tell her that it's normal to feel angry, right? This is something that is not okay. But you should also tell her that now with you, she's safe. The most important kind of message to give a child after they receive a racialized event is that they are now safe. You should also give your child a lot of time to feel and process their emotions, right? This won't kind of be resolved in 5 minutes. Tell them again that it's normal to feel upset when someone says something really mean. And don't try to tell them, that they should feel this way or that way. So on the screen, you see some ideas for how you can help them sort of help your child sort of do emotional kind of expression. Other examples are journaling, drawing, maybe she's not ready to tell you exactly what happened, but she can tell you, she can maybe draw a picture or play some music, just, sort of different ways to help her calm down and kind of express how she's feeling. You can also use the breathing exercise that we had in the breakout room to kind of, right, like sort of have her kind of be mindful about her breathing and sort of focus on that. The most important thing in this part is also to make sure that she knows you're willing and open to talk about what happened, right? And I know that you might feel really, really angry, like you might feel more angry than your daughter does, right? Because you will probably understand kind of the full context of everything more than your child does. But don't let your emotions kind of dominate the conversation. Let your child sort of lead you on, right, like how she wants to express this emotion and what she wants to tell you. But don't move on to the next step until both of you have calmed down, right? You will know that your child has calmed down if she's no longer really angry or sad or withdrawn, like, maybe she doesn't want to talk to you. Give them a lot of time. And then when you're both ready, we can move on to step 2, which is investigation. This is where you and your child can have a very open conversation about what it is that happened and how it made them feel, right? Ask them questions about, like who was there, like what were the circumstances, and, try not to kind of jump to any judgments or kind of, make her feel like ashamed, you like this shouldn't have happened or they shouldn't have done this. Leave all of that kind of aside. This time is really for, you kind of sort of expressing that you're curious, right, about what happened and want to think about this problem with your child together. One of the methods that you can use here is something called racial storytelling. And racial storytelling is something that we worked with a mental health expert to kind of use as a tool in this case. And it's used to help your child think about what happened, right? And bring sort of your perspective. So you can share a story about a racist incident that happened to you and how it made you feel. You can share, what you did in response to those encounters and sort of how you felt about those responses. And we have sort of on the list a couple of other ways you can kind of, right, talk about a racist incident using your own experience. And then there are a couple of things you can, tell them in this stage as well as you're talking about what happened. You can tell your child, sometimes people will hear mean things from other people, even their parents, and repeat them, right? You know that no one is born thinking this way, but they might hear something and think that it's okay to say, and they might say it to you. And you can kind of tap into some of the history that you heard today, right? Our ancestors and Asian Americans in history have not always been treated equally by all people. And sometimes people are really scared of things that they are not familiar with. And then I think you can also sort of tell them things to kind of sort of situate, right? Like what these messages mean and what power they might have or not have, right? So you can say, in your life, a lot of people will say things to you and they could be all different things. And you will have to decide, right, what kind of messages will you will allow inside, right, that you will think of as true. So just because someone says something to you doesn't mean that it's true, doesn't mean that it's okay or that it's correct, right? So if someone says something mean to you or something that you don't agree with, you should really question the messages that are coming to you. So for example, in this case, just because a classmate made fun of the way that you look and the way that your eyes look doesn't mean that there is something wrong with you or with the way you look or with the way, like of with who you are, right, as a person.
Yeah, and I just want to add on to this point too. The reason that we recommend racial storytelling and talking about history is because it gives your child concrete examples of how this has happened in the past. Because oftentimes children, even if they hear, you're perfect, there's nothing wrong with you, when something like this happens, it's very often for them to feel like they are alone, that this has happened to them for a reason, and maybe there is actually something wrong with them. And so by hearing other examples of it happening to other real people that they know it shouldn't have happened to, it can really help them process that. Okay, step 3, problem solving. I know we're getting a little short on time, so I'm going to keep this quick. Like I said before, problem solving is about thinking about the future. Encourage your child to think of ideas of next steps to take or what she could have done in that moment. And you should be letting your child take the lead here. You want your child to be the one brainstorming because your child should feel like she has agency in this process. Don't censor her ideas. Let her come up with both good and bad ideas of what to do. There's a sample list here. Some of them are reasonable, like telling the teacher, telling the person to stop. One of them says punching the other student. So obviously there's kind of a spectrum of good to maybe questionable ideas. But let your child get it all down first. Let them explore this for themselves. And then after that, go into the process of narrowing down. And here again, let your child take the lead. Because even from a young age, they can kind of process what might be a good idea and what might not be, right? They kind of know. And so let them think about the pros and cons so they can practice good decision making. And if it's helpful, you can use these 3 principles as a guideline. Number 1, safety. Number 2, dignity. And number 3, freedom. Because of course, always you want to prioritize your child's safety, but you also want to make sure that they come out of it with self-respect, that they can respect how they acted in that moment, and that they didn't feel constrained to do something that they didn't feel was right. Okay, and then step 4, role play the selected response, see how your child feels about it. If it doesn't feel right, then try a different selected response. And make sure that you are debriefing after each one and checking in with how acting it out and saying maybe the suggested words or doing the suggested action, how that actually makes them feel. Keep moving through the options until one of them or some of them feel right. Okay, and now I am going to hand it back to Boston Public Schools, to Grace from the Office of Equity, to talk about school procedures.
Awesome, thank you so much. I think I need screen sharing, so I'm gonna share my screen.
Grace, you should be able to share your screen now.
Okay, awesome. I think this was present mode. Right. Hi, everyone. My name is Grace Jung, and I'm the Director of Training and Accommodations in the Office of Equity. And today I'm going to give you a shortened version of a training that we actually give out to our staff, as well as to our students and families where appropriate, such as today. So before we start, just want to make sure you know who our team is. So we have several people that work in our office. And my role specifically today is to train you on some of the policies that we have and what you can do if there is a situation that happens to your child that you need to make sure is addressed at the school, right? And so what we're going to do is just kind of quickly go over what that looks like, right? So what are these policies and procedures around bias-based conduct, but also particularly around race. We're also going to learn about how you can report these concerns and then also just kind of provide you an overview of the process whenever bias is reported. So again, just to be clear, today, our office does a lot of different things, including proactive and responsive work. But today I'm gonna just focus more specifically on our policies, what we cover, and how you can report things to our office. So before we start, I just wanna kind of cover the definitions of what we cover as an office, right? So we have what's bias-based conduct, which is any action against a student or employee based on their membership in a protected category. We'll go over what that list is, but basically it means that if someone treats you differently, right? If someone makes a bad comment, right? Things like that, because of such as things like your race or your gender or your disability, those are things that get reported to our office. And another piece, just so you know, we also cover sexual misconduct. So if there is any kind of incidents where a student is treated badly, if there's, someone touches them inappropriately, if there are inappropriate comments that are made, those are things that we also cover as well. Something that I think people might not be as aware of, but we do cover that. Oops. So these are what the protected categories are. So basically, in Massachusetts, we have what are called protected classes. That means that you cannot be discriminated against, right, for any of these categories, right? So that means if someone makes a derogatory comment to me, right, about Korean people, right, it could potentially implicate things like ancestry because my parents are from Korea. It could potentially implicate race because I'm Asian, right? And those are all those things that can come to the Office of Equity. If someone treated me differently because I have a disability, right? If someone made a comment, right? Those are all things that could come to the Office of Equity. So that's just a general category of different things that we cover. This is what we call our policies. So basically, we have 7 policies, and we have them for students, and we have them for employees. And so the students one specifically, right, are EQT2. It's called bias-based conduct towards students, families, and other third parties. We have EQT3, the sexual misconduct policy, as well as EQT4, supporting our transgender and gender nonconforming students. But the biggest ones in terms of the reporting is 2 and 3. So these are the types of examples of things that could happen, right? Specifically in the context of anti-Asian racism, right? For example, Adam calls David, whose ethnicity is Chinese, an anti-Asian slur. When David tells him that it's offensive, Adam responds that it was just a joke and that he shouldn't take it so seriously. Does not matter if Adam thinks it's a joke. If David feels hurt by this comment, which is inappropriate, he gets to report it to a school administrator, who will then make sure we're contacted to make sure it's addressed. So there's some other examples that we put here, such as the last one that was similar to the one that was covered before by Julia, right? Any of these types of comments that are made are not okay. And we already know that. But not everyone knows that those things can actually be reported at the school, because it's not always clear, who do you report it to? What happens after the report? What if someone tries to get back at me for reporting, right? And so I want to make sure you know that just to start off, the way that it comes to our office is that when any of these incidents happen, it goes up to a school administrator, right? So students have the opportunity to tell their school administrators, whether it be a teacher, whether it be a dean of students, whether it be the principal, hey, something happened. And after that, the school administrator contacts the Office of Equity. And we work with the school to make sure that it's addressed. And so I think a lot of times there is a question about where the report goes. And a lot of it is that we try to make sure that the schools are aware that if they receive a report for any of these types of incidents, it needs to come to our office. Now, I'm not saying it's perfect, right? We are still working to train as many people as possible to make people aware, hey, these are the protocols. It's a continuous effort. I'm unfortunately only one person, and there's a lot of staff, but we're trying to make sure that we're training people on this. But that's something that you have the right to do, just like how employees have the same right to come to our office if they experience bias-based conduct or sexual misconduct. And just so you know that these circulars are available to, on the website, and they're available in various languages, so 10 different languages. So you can check that out on our website. And that includes reports that happen on social media. We were talking a lot about things that could happen in school, but a lot of these incidents and comments are also being said online. And those things can actually also be reported to the office, right? So there's a misunderstanding that, hey, if something happens on 11 p.m. on Saturday, or let's just say Friday right now outside of school hours, people think we can't report it to the Office of Equity. I want to make it clear that you can. These are all things that can be reported to the Office of Equity, regardless of whether it happened in school or whether someone texted it to you, whether a student received it on Snapchat or some other social media account. All of that can be reported to our office. And parents and guardians are encouraged to contact, again, either their school administrators or the Office of Equity if they have any concerns. So there are 3 different ways that you can report bias-based conduct or sexual misconduct. Again, the first thing is to probably inform a school official, a teacher, administration, or the school principal. But you can also contact the Office of Equity directly, especially if you as a parent are concerned that the school is not doing enough to address the report. So let's say you have that scenario where your child tells you that they told the teacher, but then the teacher said, that's not a big deal. Like, if they say something like those kinds of comments, guess what? You can come to us directly. If you feel like your school is not doing enough, you can contact us directly. And we will make sure we figure out what is going on, because if a teacher said that to your child, that is not okay. And we actually also investigate staff members who do not take student reports seriously and do not report things to our office. Not our favorite part of our job, but we do it because we prioritize students, and we want to make sure that if they're reporting something, that we have a way to address it, right? Because it's not just about getting anyone in trouble. We also want to make sure we're educating the person who engaged in that behavior to let them know, hey, that's not okay. You can't say that, and here's why. So that we can give resources and to make sure they understand why it's not okay. And then also so that we can provide support to the student, because as we're talking about, that's a very harmful experience. It's not something that you should be hearing at school. That's not experience that we think should be happening, but we won't know unless you tell us. We want to be able to tell you, but we help you, but we need to know how, right? And we need to first know that there was an incident. So again, if you do not feel comfortable telling your school leader, or because you feel like something, wasn't done before, you can come to us directly. Finally, the third piece is something called the Bsac Student Rights App. So basically, students can also report incidents themselves, and those reports come directly to the Office of Equity as well. So if students want to report something like themselves in their own words, they can fill out the app, and that response comes to us so that we can address it the same way as if you made a phone call or if you send an email. And again, with the reporting, right? People always ask, what happens after I send a report? Depending on what the situation is, we're going to investigate. And then you will be notified as the parent or guardian if the child, if their child is subject or reporter of an alleged incident of bias, right? And in this case, if your child has experienced the behavior, you will be notified, and we will make sure we work with the school to let you know, hey, we are addressing this and making sure, is there anything else that we can do to keep you to have your child feel safe at the school. So we work directly with the school and make sure we follow up, because if we don't hear from the school, we ask, hey, school, what happened, right? You said you were going to investigate this. What was the result? We always follow up with the school to make sure that something was completed from beginning to end. And we also check in with schools to make sure that parents are contacted. And if that hasn't happened, again, you can let us know so we can fix that, right? Because you should be contacted if at the end of an investigation, you still don't know what's happening. The last thing is something called retaliation. Basically, what it means is that you cannot be treated differently. Your child cannot be treated differently because they reported something. So if someone said, made a horrible comment, right, a racist comment to your child, and then it was investigated after it was reported, and then suddenly your child is then receiving more bad behavior, right? If your child is now experiencing, more trouble because they reported something, that's actually also against our policy. And that also is something we can investigate, which means it's also something that we would love to hear about, because that's not okay. We want to protect people who reported things to our office, because it's not okay if someone tries to get back at you for having reported something to our office. And so for retaliation, if that is happening after something has been reported to our office and investigated, please let us know so that we can look into it. So that was really the basic presentation from a reporting perspective, right? Again, I wanted to keep it straight to the point. We have our contact information, we have our website. All that contact information is also on our website. I'm also happy to give my direct contact information after this presentation in the chat so that you can have it. But this is really just the reporting piece of it. I totally know that there's a lot more that's going on, a lot more that we can always be doing. But at least from a reporting perspective, I want to make sure you know that we are here, and that we do receive reports. And this is the office that oversees all these student and employee reports. Thank you.
Thank you, Grace. Hello, everyone. So next we will have our Q&A. 我哋而家接落嚟咧係問答環節。Sorry, Kathy, will you mind stop screen sharing so we can see each other? Thank you. Also, for the Q&A session, I would like to make a slight change. So I will be facilitating in Cantonese. So Anna, could you please switch to the Cantonese channel? Yeah, I will be speaking in Cantonese, and please interpret into English. Thank you. 好，係Anna，我而家開始係用廣東話，希望你幫我翻譯成英文。唔好意思，呢個係最後一刻嘅改變。
咁我要講英文嘅，冇問題嘅。
English speaker, you may stay in the English channel.
Okay, great. So now I'll be speaking English.
Okay.
Great, you can hear me, right? You guys can hear me English? That's great. Perfect. So Melody will be speaking Cantonese. I'll be interpreting English. So I switched to the English channel. So Terry will be doing Mandarin. So if you have any questions, just now is your chance to raise your hands, and or you can type it in the chat room, and then we can answer the question.
The chat doesn't go to everyone. It just goes to the Office of English Learners.
Okay. June, could you please June 你可唔可以即係重新設置一下？
June, can you fix this? We're going to see if they change the setting.
For the chat setting, could you make it 可以即係每個人都可以 chat 到大家？
So everybody can chat in the chat room.
大家都可以打字去嗰個聊天室嗰度。
係唔該晒 June。
So everybody can type in the chat room. So now we can communicate through the chat room. So everybody are welcome to ask questions. Any parents, you're welcome to ask any questions that you have. I'm sorry. I'm Maggie. I have a question. I'm not sure. Is this related to what we talk about tonight? If my child is in it's in elementary junior high school, so like learning remotely, having some difficulties. So and then we told the teacher, but the teacher is not very helpful. So
I don't hear Cantonese interpretation.
Maggie 你可以繼續，跟住應該係英文嗰邊已經係同時翻譯緊㗎啦。
Oh, okay, sorry.
So Maggie, you can continue because we have English interpretation at the same time. So the school my child is attending has a less proportion of Asian students. So it is easy to think about maybe the teacher doesn't really kind of neglect the Asian students. So sometimes the student, my child, is like learning online is not the greatest platform. The teacher just stopped teaching. So it happens many times. So the parents will ask why my child is being kicked out from learning. So it's because my child is not giving a reaction. That's why he or she was being kicked out. That shouldn't be the case. So I don't know what's the policy that the school has. So if the school cannot provide the help, what my child can do to resolve this problem, or should we go to the principal, or who should we kind of follow up with this kind of problem? Because why the teacher always kick me out from the classroom? Well, because sometimes the assignment is not on the due date yet. The teacher already gave me a grade on this. Doesn't seem to be fair. Thank you for your question. Anybody wanted to answer that?
Grace 請問
Grace,
Yeah.
for the question,
I don't think
can you
I'm
answer that question?
I don't think I'm the
oh.
best person. However, I would strongly recommend talking to the principal, because if that's happening, we want to be figuring out why. So again, I don't cover the classroom piece, but I think I would still encourage you to contact the principal if that's happening. But I just want to make sure I'm not giving or answering beyond that, because it's not my area of expertise.
Yeah, sometimes I feel like a lot of the things happened in school system, and you will feel like you don't know the grievances process in a school system. That's actually my the other questions. Like the first question is like a very specific happening to this child, and then like in general, like how we navigate in the school system, like in an individual public school, and then in the entire Boston public school system, how parents are able to navigate and to problem solve. Yeah, I think that's my questions. Yeah.
OK, 好嘅，多謝你 Maggie。咁
Oh, thank you, Maggie, for your question. I will look into it and see if I can give you a better answer for that. So let's give another, and at the same time, it just so let me know how I can contact you so I can follow up with what we talk about. Jenny, you're next.
大家好啊，其實咧我哋
Hi everyone, I'm Jenny. So sometimes our Chinese parents, we don't know how to communicate with the teacher, because after our child being bullied, the teacher would say, "Well, it's not a big deal. Like you just, the parents would think, well, because our English is not so good, we don't know how to communicate with the teacher. So the kids would complain a few times and then feel like there's nothing much that we can do. So it's not a good feeling for the child. So even the child like complain a few times, but he will stop complaining. So even the child complain. Well, we feel like the teacher should do something, because we feel like the teacher doesn't do much to address the problem. And then the kids kind of, then because the kids will feel safer in school, because something he was treating unfairly, but nothing was done. So we hope that the school will really do something about this, because we really want our child to go to school to feel safe in his or her learning environment, so we can and really address this and change the situation. So now we have Trey Ling, a Mandarin speaker. Trey Ling, 你好.
Hello, Trey Ling. Hello.
我刚才看到那个
I think
I heard you
am
were
I
talking
interpreting
about
English or
the
Cantonese? I'm a little
social
confused. I'll do
network.
Cantonese.
For example, the social media violence, and I feel like recently there are some anxieties involved in this. There's a lot of technologies. It's involved very quickly, and parents like us, how can we? A lot of kids are going, they're staring at the computer all the time, they're online all the time. What can we do as a parents to protect like internet safety or privacy for our children? Is there any tips that you can share with us? Grace, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Could you help answer the question?
Yes. So I think in terms of internet safety, I think that's a little bit trickier, because everyone uses that differently. So I think the first thing that is, that needs to be made clear is what's okay to say and what's not okay to say, right? What's okay to hear versus what's not okay to hear. And making sure that your child can recognize when that's something that they need to bring up to you or to a school, administrator, if it's not okay. So I know there are a lot of different things that can be done online, things like the block, report features, ways to, limit your privacy in general. I always tell people there's, you don't have 1,000 friends on Facebook, right? And that there are different ways that you can obviously limit that, but I can't control, unfortunately, what actually will happen on social media, which is why I focus more on making sure you know where to go if and when something happens on social media. So I want to kind of combine a couple things because I also see some questions in the chat and want to address a little bit of it that goes together. This training called Equity Protocols Training really just kind of covers the basic policies and reporting procedures, as well as guidelines for social media for employees and students. But this training is mainly targeted towards employees in terms of when it started. So we've trained probably over, in my time, probably maybe over 1,000 different staff members, probably more. And in the training, we cover a variety of topics of things that can come to our office, right? Including things like microaggressions. It's a very, very common misunderstanding that something serious has to happen in order for something to come to our office. But that's also not true. We hear comments, things like, oh, all Asians are good at math, right? Or sometimes they send a really inappropriate, like a meme or picture depicting an Asian person, and they're like, oh, it's just a joke. But those things are not okay either, right? Saying stuff like, oh, you don't need help because you're Asian, right? You're smart. Those are also not comments that are okay. And those are things that actually can't be shared with our office. So we try to emphasize when we do trainings in general that comments come in all forms. Sometimes it's political speech. Sometimes it's microaggressions. Sometimes it's serious comments. Sometimes it's slurs. Sometimes it's hate speech and direct threats. All of those come to the Office of Equity. You yourself do not have to measure as a parent, oh, is it serious enough to come? That's not how you should be thinking about it. If something has happened or been sent to your child and you know it's not okay and it's hurting your child, that's good enough. We want to hear about it. And the second piece about the just, in general about what's available for students, there's something called the 24/7 Respect program, which is basically a video training like version of equity protocols training that we just kind of went through, the mini one, but in video format for students. So 24/7 Respect, and I'll make sure a link is sent out. And again, we're working to continue making it accessible in language as much as we can. But the video is basically walks through 4 different scenarios of things that can and be investigated by our office. And the first example is actually of an Asian student who is text messaging with their friends and someone's making comments like, oh, but you're good at math, and uses a very sort of a racist meme and kind of makes the Asian student feel uncomfortable. So then in that scenario, we walk through like different questions, like how do you think that student felt, right? Why is this not okay? Like things like that to process the situation. And then some tips at the end about what can you be doing if this happened to you. So that's actually the first example in our 24/7 Respect program, which is aimed towards 6th to 12th grade. We just rolled it out this year again. We had rolled it out just to our 6th grade students last year, and prior to that to 6 to 12 again. And so for 6 to 12, that is available, and it's also on our website. And then in addition, right, we are continuing to work on the kind of supports that we can provide for, kids and, students who are below 6th grade. But in terms of that resource, it's available to students, and we actually have that training done at school with students.
I also wanted to follow up on that because I know one of the questions in the chat asks about microaggression training, which I can't speak to about the BPS school district, but it ends with saying that if the teacher brushed it off, how is the child going to say this to their parent? How's the parent even going to know that something happened? And so I just wanted to speak a little bit here because I think that's a very common concern, right? And unfortunately, I mean, every parent-child relationship is different. What you can do is make sure they know the door is always open. And what I mean by that, it can look like a lot of different things. Something that sometimes happens is a child goes to their parent and says something like,
Kathy, sorry. Please slow down a little bit.
Sorry. The child says, I was out last night with my friends and someone called me like a bad word, right? And sometimes the parent's first instinct, because they are so scared of what could have happened to their child while they were outside with their friend, maybe you thought that they were at their friend's house, etc., that you say something like, why were you out there? I told you not to go out with your friends past a certain time of night. If you didn't go out like this, this would not have happened. And this is a totally normal reaction, right? This is born out of fear for your child because what you want most is for your child to be safe. But sometimes these reactions can cause the child to learn that if they go to the parent with a problem like this, the parent might actually scold them, right? And what I bring up this example not to shame parents. Even if you have reacted in this way before, it's not like that's broken. You can never have that conversation again, right? What's important is for the parent to take time to think about how they are processing things emotionally too, which is why we did that activity in the breakout room. It's really important for parents also to ground ourselves emotionally. So when our children come to us with things that are very upsetting, we can be a calm and supportive presence for them. We don't jump to judgment. We listen to what they have to say first. And when something happens, maybe your child doesn't talk to you about it right away, but you know your child. You notice that they are withdrawn. Maybe they're irritable. Maybe they're snapping more than usual. You can ask them if something's going on at school. And, depending on how old your child is, they might brush you off. But you can ask a few more times. You can say something, you can tell a story from your own childhood, right? And all of this, maybe you try this 5 times. 5 times it doesn't work. But none of this is fruitless. Your child is still taking in everything you're saying. Each time you're reaching out that hand, they are learning that you want to talk to them and you want to be someone that they can talk to about this. So don't stop trying.
Can I just make a quick plug for other support staff in BPS buildings, such as school psychologists, guidance counselors, school counselors, social workers. There's a lot of staff that can be sort of accessed beyond just the classroom teacher and the principal. So leverage those relationships and those helping staff for your child and even for parents.
Just to mention one more thing, I know there's a lot of different kind of topics we can talk about. IHI is coming out with a guide to sort of provide some more scenarios like the one we covered today and how you can talk to your kids. And we're able to get some funding to translate it into languages like Chinese. So we can kind of send that out if you're interested in that as an additional resource.
Melody, I'm going to share a resource with you for the Mandarin speaking parents. It's a training by a university professor about how to talk to your kids about racism and how to practically kind of address those things that I think a lot of questions were raised in the chat room. So yeah.
Thank you, Jessica. We will send out a follow-up email to share the resources as well. Sorry that we didn't have enough time to answer all the questions in the chat. And also I saw a few hand raised, but we will definitely want to hear from you. So please feel free to reach out to us by email, or I also leave my phone number in the chat. So Again, like, thank you so much for attending this workshop. And actually gonna switch back to the Cantonese.
So, hi, thank you everyone for joining us tonight for our meeting. And thank you for our facilitators and Kathy and Julia and from the Immigrant History Initiative. Again, thank you for our parents and joining and Yan helping us to facilitate tonight. And we'll be in touch. Hope you all have a great night and have a wonderful weekend.
Thank you.
Thank you. That's it. Thank you so much. That's it.